Welcome you to our first of our 2015 speaker series. These are something that we always enjoy putting on because we can focus in on a topic of interest, and I know it's always fun to learn more about a community in Gasconade County. So this will be a lot for me to learn about. I don't know the history of them, so I'm looking forward to this. I do want to thank our sponsors, which thankfully, because they are willing to make a donation for our website sponsors, we're able to video each one of these speaker series. So if you haven't had a chance to attend every one of our speaker series, go online. And Jim Wyman, who's behind the camera over there, thank you, Jim, one of our board members, for always doing the videos. Our sponsors this year include Herman sponsors. Many of them have been sponsors for a number of years, so thank you for doing that. And if you've not been on the website, you should check it out because there's all your calendars there. It has all the speaker series and the programs on it, and you can watch those at any time. There's also a lot of research information there, as well as information about our communities. Anna, I'd like to turn the meeting over to Anna Rademacher, who is our Speaker Series Committee Chair.
Thank you, Cindy. Welcome you to this first of 4 of the Speaker Series we're having this year. And I'm going to give you the dates. There should be something in the newspapers leading up to these, so you don't have to remember them. But if you have your iPhone handy, just write these down just in case. The next one, Speaker Series number 2, is on stone houses. We will be seeing 4 different stone houses in the Drake area, and this will be driving yourself or carpooling, meeting at the Drake Methodist Church at 2 o'clock on Sunday, June 14th. The third one, the Speaker Series number 3, is on vintage machinery. And this is going to be presented by the Gasconade County Threshers Association. And it will be in Pavilion number 1 at the Fairgrounds, Sunday, August 16th at 2 o'clock. And the fourth one, the Speaker Series number 4, is a cemetery walk in Fredericksburg. And it'll be Sunday, September 27th at 2 p.m. We have not always had these on Sunday afternoons, but these particular subjects lend themselves to be outdoor events, and so that's why we're having them. And this has been really a well-received activity. It is a fundraiser for the Historical Society, and we appreciate you coming. And we want to thank the church, the St. John's UCC Church, for hosting this event. And as part of their thank you, I have a sign that we'd like to give to them. So would someone from their church please come and receive this? This is indeed a landmark of the area, of the county, and we have a program where we are recognizing different landmarks and century homes. So if you have a site that you'd like for us to know about, please let Sandy Nolan or myself know about this. But this is for St. John's, and we got all of that in there. Even Galicia is all there. The important people afterwards will have a photo op with that one, Rick. Okay. Okay? All right. So the program next is going to be, I lost you here. The program, we have a very involved committee putting this history together for BEM, Community History of BEM, and we have found this to be really a fun thing for people to do. And the people of this community have really rallied behind this committee, so I think Phyllis is the one who is kind of in charge. It's yours.
I too want to thank everyone for coming. And I would like to introduce our presentators today, Peggy Schaefer, Faye Howard, John Crater, and myself, Phyllis Gross. And also recognize Vera, although she's not making any presentation today, she did a lot of legwork and research for the committee too, so thank you all. And also, our video person, Paula Shockley, thank her. And the presentators would like to thank everyone who shared their pictures or their memories, their stories, their knowledge, anything that you did to help us get this program together. So we all want to say thank you. The other thing I would like to mention, we are going to have several pictures up on the screen. So if anyone is sitting in a position where there's a post in your line of sight or you can't see, this is the time to get up and move. And we do have some seats over here which would be have a direct line to the screen. The front pew, I know that's kind of hard for people to sit in the front pew at church, but you can see very well there. So if there's anybody that can't see, please do move, because I think you're going to enjoy the pictures. Okay? And one more little thing. After our program today, we invite you to come up and look at some of the memorabilia and the photos and stuff that we've gathered. And also, right through this door here, when you open that door, you will be greeted by cookies and refreshments. So don't forget that. I would also tell you that after the program is over, the BIM store, BIM Mercantile, has graciously agreed to be open for a little while. So if anybody wants to stop in there on your way home or whatever, that would be great too.
And I'll open the store as soon as I get out of the parking lot. So if you want to be there, just give me a minute.
Okay. Well, they're going to have a cookie first.
Right. So I'll run over.
Anyway, if you'd like to stop there, I'm sure you'll enjoy that tour also. So with no more comments, I'm going to turn this over to Peggy Schaefer.
Okay, before I start my part of this, I would like to say that John and Faye and Phyllis and I all grew up together, adjoining farms down the road on Cranny Road, just northeast of here. So we've known each other all our lives, and we were thrilled to be able to do this. The village proper of Bend is about 6 miles south of Owensville on Cranny Road, just east of Highway 19 and just north of Dry Fork, which would be northeast of here. When we first started talking about the history of Bend, one of the things that I wanted to do was try to find out how we got the name of Bend for this community. And actually, were it not for one of those crazy twists of fate, today we would be sitting here in St. John's Church, Beaver, Missouri. That's right. When the residents in 1856 decided to apply for a post office, they chose the name Beaver because of the huge beaver pond that was located just north of Dry Fork. And it must have been a huge beaver pond because it's noted on the 1875 plat map, and it's also noted in Goodspeed's history of Gascony County. Now, in my mind, I can just picture that whole field being water and beaver dams and those beavers. So when you go back to Owensville, right after you cross the bridge, if you'll look to your right and to your left, and imagine the highway not being there, and that all being water, and that big beaver pond. Well, we didn't become Beaver, Missouri, because there was already a Beaver, Missouri, when they applied the application. So, how did we get the name of Bend? Well, there's one local story that says that it was named after a Polish general named Ben. And there were a few residents in the area that came from Eastern Europe. So it's possible that they held this man in such high esteem that they wanted to honor him by calling their post office BEM. But we don't know. That's one of those things that's lost in history. Another question that I had was, where did our first settlers come from, and when did they come? So I searched through census records and patent maps to find the answer to that. If you remember, in the early 1800s, our country spread from the east coast, the Atlantic coast, to the Mississippi River, north at Canada, and south to Spanish Louisiana and Florida. As farmland became much more expensive in the east due to overcrowding, as they thought, people started moving west. And after the Louisiana Purchase in 1803, the General Land Office in St. Louis began to survey Missouri and to offer public land for sale. And it would go for as cheap as $1.25 an acre. When public lands were sold, the buyer was given a patent. And the patent was nothing but a transfer of ownership from the federal government to the buyer. And land patents were signed by the then current President of the United States. This one is a copy of one that was given to Samuel Burchard for 80 acres just west of Bem, over on what is now Hecker Road. And it's dated 1829, and it was signed by Andrew Jackson. Pardon me. To find out where our settlers came from, I searched census records. I started with the 1840 census and looked at Burbus Township. At that time, there were 4 townships in Gaston County, and Burbus being the southernmost. And what I found was that almost all of those early people here came from Virginia or North Carolina, Kentucky, Tennessee, Indiana, or Pennsylvania. When I looked at the 1850 census, it was the same thing. In 1860, I started to see some of those German names. Then in the 1870 census, there was a large increase in the number of German residents here in this area. And that coincides with all of the political and religious and social unrest that was going on in Germany, and we had that big migration come here. So that's when we had our big increase right here. The second volume of the Gaston County History book tells us that a Henry Reed was one of the first settlers in Gaston County, and that he settled on the Burbus River. Well, Henry Reed had a land patent right here in 1825 for 80 acres. And that is located just east of Bem, where the Dry Fork runs into the Burbus. Other land patents around Bem were Isaac Cantley, Samuel Burchard, Daniel and John McMillan, and there's a David McMillan, Charlotte Hosfeld, William Taylor. Here's another one for Henry Reed. Here's a Cozart. So, and we have some of those descendants still living in this area today. On an 1875 plat map, we see names like Hollander, Linky, Taylor again, Halbeke, Homeyer, Enke, Schultz, and some of those names are still familiar with us today. Okay?
So, how do people get to Bem, Missouri? There was a road, which is the red line, from Cuba to Owensville, and that was called the Cuba-Owensville Road, or maybe if you lived in Owensville, it was called the Owensville-Cuba Road. Whichever, that road basically run through It was definitely a gravel road and run mainly east of the current Highway 19. There was a very interesting bridge that went across the Bourbous just east of here. And does anybody recognize that, a hog trough bridge that used to go over that bridge? Well, as a kid, that was a very, very scary bridge. And if you can see in the lower corner there, the bridge was built over the water, no sides. It had planks to drive the car over, and in the center they had boards or planks that if your tire hit it, you couldn't actually run off the bridge. But we as kids knew we was falling in that river. Down the middle, they had supports, which kind of looks like a hog trough, and I'm guessing that's how that bridge got its name. There's a story about Raymond Nelson. Of course, we would drive across, or we hoped our fathers would drive across that bridge very slowly. There's a story about Raymond Nelson, who decided he would try to drive over that bridge and went 40 miles an hour. Came up, you that know where this bridge was, came up around the hill and around the corner and took out a bunch of Sidney Murphy's chickens. I'm sure Sidney Murphy was not very happy at that point. Today we have the concrete bridge there, and unfortunately when the water gets up we can't cross the creek and we have to go all the way around. But that was just a little story about the bridge. Then in 1922, the state of Missouri took over the Cuba-Owensville Road, and at that time it was gravel, and it stayed gravel for several years. In one of the accounts, and then they built this bridge just east of the bridge that is here now on 19. And you can still see those pillars. The pillar part of the bridge is still there. There's an account in Mr. Crater's lecture book that we have up on the table where a group of people from the Brush Creek Township met and decided that they would loan money to Gasconade County in 1924 to finish building this bridge, and then Gasconade County was to reimburse them for the money when the taxes was paid that year. So the bridge was built in 1924. The page after this account is tore out, so we don't have any names, and we don't have, we don't know for sure if they ever really loaned the money to the county or not. But the bridge was built, but during that time, several of the mules died, whether they were worked too hard or whatever, and the account is they buried them in that great big beaver pond. Then in 1940s, Highway 19 was actually built and paved at that time where the present bridge is now, and the present highway is now.
One of the important things in the lives of everybody are the schools. In 1847, the residents of Township 41 applied to county court and received permission to establish school districts. And at that time, the townships would be divided into fourths, and each 1/4 was to have a school. We do know that Burchard School was the first in the township. I couldn't find any records of actually when it was established, but we do know it would have been before 1865 when the second school district was established. Burchard School was located just off of present-day Hecker Road near the Hollander Farm. And Taylor School number 2 is located east of Bem, just off of Cranny Road. Oak Grove number 3 is located just east of Homeyer Road, and Lone Ridge number 4 was located just off of Price Road. I have a picture of Burchard School, and that's Burchard School. Couldn't find anything else about Burchard. Those records are lost. Taylor School District number 2 was established in 1865 when William O. and Sarah Taylor deeded 1 acre of land to the trustees of the school district. The first schools in our county were, of course, made of logs and were later replaced with frame buildings. This building, I think, was probably built about in the 1880s. In the picture, the little girl that's holding the slate, the slate is dated. It's November 1899. The 2 big social events of any one-room school were pie suppers and the last day of school celebration. And this is a picture of the last day of school celebration at Taylor School. There was no year on it. Go ahead. Okay. And this is a set of rules that hung on the wall at Taylor School, and it's dated 1880. And the rules were, says rules for the government of the public school in District Number 2, Township 41, Range 5 West, Gaston County, Missouri. Number 1, no talking or laughing in school. Number 2, no vulgar or profane language while at school. Number 3, male and female students must be kept separate in school and also on the playground. No pupil shall absent themselves from school without leave from the teacher. Any pupil affected with any contagious disease, such as itch, sore eyes, and etc., must stay away from school until well. Number 6, no pupil is allowed to spit umber on the stove or floor. 7, any pupil violating any of the above rules who shall resist punishment at the hands of the teacher may be expelled by the teacher or referred to the directors. And on the side it says the teacher is required to enforce these rules without favor or affection. Now, in my research, I also found that in the length of the school term in 1882 was 4 months. They went from October through February. The teacher taught for 80 days, had 34 students, and received a salary of $30. I also found that in 1912 and 1913, at the annual school meeting, the question came up of building a new building. Well, it was voted down those 2 years. In 1914, it finally passed, and they built a new frame building. They borrowed $800 from the Owensville Bank and secured it with a bond, and this is a copy of that bond. Paul, go to the next picture. Okay, and that is the new school building. And what I like to call the current school building. This building served the district until 1953, when the students were transported into Owensville. The building was purchased by Sonny and Carol Dotson, and they remodeled it and made it their home, where they still live today. And I have a picture of the way it looks now up here on the table. The old building in the 1899 picture was torn down by B.F. Murphy, and he used the lumber to help build a chicken house and a barn that's located on the Sharon Atkinson farm. That's on Hogtroft Road. Faye and I were the last first graders to go to school there. I'd like for you to raise your hand if you went to school at Taylor School. Got a few. Anybody go to Burchard School? Okay, good. All right, John? You're next.
Hello, everybody. My name is John Crater. Not working?
Yeah, it's working out, just pull it up.
Okay.
We want everybody to hear the story.
All right. Okay, let me get her up there. How's that? Is that better?
Yeah.
Better? Okay, I'll just talk about it. I've lived in the Bend community all my life. First 18 years I lived east of Bend. Next 7 years I lived west of Bend. And the last 43 years I lived north of Bend. So if you're good at math, then you can figure out about how old I am. Anyway, farming is the main business of this rural community. But as in today's world, farmers also had sideline occupations or businesses to supplement their income. So I'll start with some of the sideline businesses. In Gasconade County,
John, I don't think they're hearing these very well. Can you just use the other one?
is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. The Gasconade County Republican article of March 11th, 1910 reads as follows. Got a copy here. J.H. Anke and Theodore Mittendorf of near Bem have each started a skunk farm. Mr. Anke was in town last week, and he tells us he finds these animals easy to handle and care for, and sees no reason why a skunk farm should not prove a success. The hides are quite valuable, selling last winter as high as $3.50 and $4 a piece. Mr. Anke is now trying to get stocked up and wants as many live skunks as he can get. If you happen to have a few more on hand than you can use this spring, just put one or two in your pocket when you pass that way, and you can dispose of them to Mr. Anke for a profit. That's probably Rick's great-grandpa over there. And then, continuing on, my dad told me of a gentleman that lived on the north side of Dry Fork that is now the Marshall Schaefer Cutter Farm, and his business in the community was to clean out houses. I don't have his name down for sure, but anyway. Then we move on. William F. Anke, better known as Big Bill, who lived just north of the blacksmith shop in Bem, owned a sawmill and a thrashing machine. And he also owned a farm down on the mouth of the Dry Fork at the Burbus, which later was owned by his son-in-law, Berkeley Hamilton, and daughter, Liddy Hamilton. And then we have Bill Adam Anke, better known as Little Bill, who lived and farmed west of Bem on the Dry Fork Creek. And he was a carpenter, and in later years, he was an electrician. Harvey Petrosky was also an electrician. Ed Havelke owned a sawmill, and Bill Petrosky also a sawmill owner. And they lived southwest of Bem, 2 or 3 miles on what is now the Bem Church Road. George Landler was the community's first veterinarian and lived on Dry Fork Creek. On the farm my wife and I now live on and have lived there for 42 years. Louis Anke, better known as Louis, who owned and operated for many years a garage, gas station, and bar about 3 miles south of Bem on Highway 19. I'm sure a lot of you remember Louis. But anyway, Louis got his start as a mechanic in Bem, in a small building next to Bill Landler's Dance Hall and Tavern. And that was built about 1932. Bill Landler also sold Phillips 66 gasoline. And basically that is where Bem General is located at today. Earl Taylor, also a farmer, built and operated the Showboat, which opened about 1934. And Ben had a blacksmith shop. In 1913, Alf Matthews sold the shop to Henry Voss. Later it was sold to Edward Morey, who stayed until 1936. After that, Henry Gherkin was the last known blacksmith in Bem. And we do not know exactly when that blacksmith shop closed down. Dr. N.G. Matthews had an office in Bem, and a Dr. W.S. Ferris came to Bem several times a month for dental appointments. And we're not for sure exactly where these, these offices were, but believed to have been in this building here, which is the warehouse for the old Bem store, sitting just a few feet northwest of the old store building. And it's where the Modern Woodman Lodge and the Royal Neighbors group met. There were, it was like a warehouse downstairs, and then upstairs it was like a hall. And that's where these clubs met. And here, well, we got this picture up here. I'll give you the names of those folks. From left to right, Henry Miller, Arnold Crater, who's a small one that's sitting in the wagon, Charlotte Stock, Armin Crater, Clara Petrosky, Irvin Miller, and George Landmark. There was a hub factory in Bem also. In 1884, Fred Linke sold the hub factory to Benjamin Souter. We don't know exactly where the hub factory was at originally, but on November 1884, Benjamin Souter leased a strip of land from Henry Lankenau for 4 years. This is part of the Don Lenore farm west of Bem on Hecker Road now. The factory had its own machine shop for a necessary repair if a breakdown would occur. And the newspaper indicated in December the 19th, 1888, that the Missouri Hub factory was preparing to move to Crawford County. So I guess it lasted about 4 years. And there's a little story that goes along with the Hub factory. In approximately late February or early March of 1879, this is still when Fred Linke owned the Hub factory, his employees by the name of Henry Post and Andrew Henderson got into an argument. Post said that Henderson's son had stole a pair of mule shoes from him. And Post came to Henderson's home and a fight began. Both men were wielding clubs. And Post took Henderson's club away from him and hit him with his own weapon, striking him on the head. Henderson died a few hours later, not thinking the wound was very serious. The newspaper clipping said that his skull was dented. Not sure how this case actually ended. I want to get into the, that's the Lankenau house right there. We'll get into the Bem stores. We have stories that there was a trading post on what is now the Ricky Henson farm, and that's out on Blocks Branch Road. Prior to that, it was owned by Earl Taylor. This was a log building setting out near the road, which I've been in many times because I used to work for Earl Taylor quite a lot when I was a kid. It's since been tore down, but it was probably the very first store of any kind in this community. It was located near the mouth of the Dry Fork and the Bourbous. Actually, the mouth of the Dry Fork, where the Dry Fork ran into the Bourbous. And the building was a log structure, and it sat pretty high off the ground. And I suspect it was designed specifically just to keep the varmints out and so forth. Back in those days, these waterways, Dry Fork and Burgess was a means of travel, trapping and hunting and so forth, and it would have been a very good location for a trading post right there. The first store in Bem proper, we believe to have been owned by Fred Linke in 1875. Later owned by W.P. Burchard and Mr. Veman, located in what now is my farm, a few hundred yards northwest of downtown Bem. The store was an addition to the south side of our house. This is where the famous robbery occurred back in 1883. And we're not exactly for sure when that store closed down either. But in 1885, Henry and David Taylor built another store, which is the old store building that is still standing in downtown Bend. They sold this store to H. Lewis Landwehr in 1888, and Mr. Landwehr ran the store for 25 years. Then Henry F. Prater bought the store in 1913. Henry F. Prater is my grandfather. And we've got pictures of that store here, and I'll give you some names of the people standing there. From left to right, we have Irvin Miller, Armin Prater was a little guy, Henry Prater, Henry Miller, Bill Anke, Sam Prater, and Ferg Slutty. And the little guy at the below my grandfather there was my dad, Arnold Prater. Grandpa Prater owned the Bem store for 19 years until his death in 1932. And he owned vehicles back in the day, but never drove. My father, Arnold Prater, was born in 1915 and started driving at the age of 12 to 13 years old. He drove Grandpa Prater to Jay, Oklahoma one time when he was 13 years old. That had been about 1928. He said when he got there, his hands were numb for several hours. Can't imagine that, but anyway. So my dad's job at a very early age was to haul freight from the depot in Oldsville out to the Bem store via the Cuba-Oldsville or Oldsville-Cuba road. And I told you that little story so I could tell you this story, because Phyllis wanted me to tell you this story. Anyway, one day my dad had a big load on the old truck coming home from when he arrived there was a large box of cookies that he knew he had loaded at the depot. Dad said that he had only met one other vehicle on that trip, and he knew that man. And he was sure that that man had found that box of cookies along the road. So that's the end of that part of the story. Next part of the story, here if I can find it, is now my mother was born and raised in Gerald, Missouri, and her parents wanted the kids to go to the Oldsville School District. So Grandpa Fickey either bought or rented a house just south of Oldsville out on what is now Cuba Road, or Cuba Street, just south of Dry Branch. Cuba Street is actually part of the old Oldsville-Cuba Road. And then several years after Mom and Dad had actually gotten married and they were sitting around talking, telling old stories, Mom told of one day her and some other kids were playing down by Dry Branch and found this big old box of cookies. And that was where the road forded the branch, and back in them days there was no bridges or anything. So putting two and two together, the mystery was solved. And Dad always did tell me, he said, the moral of this story is you cannot convict someone on circumstantial evidence. We've got pictures here of my grandfather on the left, my dad in the middle, my Uncle Armin Crater on the right side. And that there's a dog. My dad's holding a dog there, and he said it was really a great squirrel dog. He said one year he had as many as 100 squirrel tails nailed up on the warehouse door. And back in them days, squirrel tails, you could sell them to the fur companies, and you could also sell any kind of fur as far as that goes. And my grandpa would trade rabbits that had been trapped or killed. They would take the intestines out of them and leave the rabbit whole. And Dad told me that during the wintertime, Grandpa might have a pile of rabbits that high, and sometime before the weather got cold, well, they would box them all up, take them to the depot, and send them back to St. Louis. And whatever happened to them from there, I have no idea. But anyway, after Henry Crater's sudden death in 1932, my Uncle Armin Crater took over the store with the help of my grandmother, Mary Crater. And the Owensville-Cuba gravel road, now Highway 19, was completed, and this basically bypassed Bem proper. So in 1941, Uncle Armin Crater purchased Bill Landler's dance hall, tavern, gas station, and turned it into Crater's store, which is now Bem General and is owned and operated by the Atkinson family. And during this time, my father, Arnold Crater, operated a trucking and fertilizer business, and he also farmed. In those days, most livestock was shipped to Eastern stockyards. And the bag fertilizer, grain, coal, and any other freight was the backhaul. In 1960, Armin or Arno started a feed business and purchased a Daffin feed mill for the purpose of grinding, processing, and blending feed, which was a on-the-farm service. In 1974, due to the health problems of both the brothers, Armin's son James Crater took over the business. And in 1996, due to his health, shut down the business. At this time, there are several businesses in operation in Bem. We have Keeney Fertilizer and Farm Supply, located out here at Bem Church Road and Highway 19. We've got Bem General, located down on Highway 19 at the old Crater store location. We've got Quality Tool, a machine shop owned and operated by Darrell and Darrell Nix and his wife, and that's up here on Bem Church Road. Dale Hoblicki has a sawmill out east of Bem. Wayne Miller sells used equipment. Roger Hankey has a concrete finishing business. Rick Thoreau has a skid steer, excavating, and mowing business. And the Hollander brothers run a fencing company. And today's farming is still a very active and thriving business in the Bem community. A lot of cattle is raised in the area, and grain farming still is plentiful in the creek bottom areas. So that's basically the history of the businesses in Bem.
Need it, but anyway, we don't really know exactly where the boundaries of Bem, but we do know it was a very special community. A community that sticks together, working and playing. Many traditions have carried on from generation to generation. Some of the buildings, events, and people have gone, but one constant is the church. There are accounts of the church services being held in Bem area in the late 1840s through the early 1860s, but there is no mention where these churches would have been located. They may have been just held in people's homes at that time. The present site of the Bem Church was established in 1869. The original land purchase from the government, which Peggy was talking about, was owned by George Graham. And their heirs in May of 1869 sold the piece of land to Godfrey Anke, Herman Overcrone, Frederick Druch for $125. And this was 80 acres that still belongs to the church. Then they donated it to build a church and were the first trustees of St. John's Evangelical Lutheran Church. The first church was a log building which was sitting behind the present church building and facing the cemetery. And this is the only part of that building that we could find a picture of. Then in 1869, they built the first church. Now, the log church was used also for a German school because a lot of the Germans was here and they were not allowing their children to speak German, or no German was to be spoken in the home because of the German problems that they ran away from. So the problem was the catechism book was all in German and the kids couldn't read German. So the minister, the pastor that was here, was to hold school in that log building, which they also called the Little German School, to teach the kids to read the catechism book, because if you wanted to be a member of the church, you had to memorize that catechism book. Do y'all remember memorizing that catechism book? These kids has got it pretty easy now, I think. But anyway, so for them to become a member of the church, and remember, this is only boys or men that could become members at that time. At that point, they decided to vote to decide the name of the church, whether it be an Evangelical Lutheran Church or an Evangelical Church. The vote was taken, and it was voted to be an Evangelical Church, and that's how we became an Evangelical Church here in Bim. Mr. Lincoln, which you heard a little bit about, and we'll hear a little more about, apparently was a very influential man here, and he informed the congregation that the majority ruled. It was to be an evangelical church, and stated that majority ruled. So I'm guessing maybe there might have been a little bit of distinction in the church at that point after the taking of the vote. The center of the church was built in 1860, which some of you are sitting in, which went from post to post. And as you can see, several additions have been made to the church since then. The wings, the Sunday school rooms, the room where we'll be eating, all of that has been added in different phases. We also know of a church that is just east of 19, going straight off of Cramming Road. That church has been referred to as the Little Church, or the Church on the Hill. We did find an account of Mr. William Emanuel Taylor, who in his obituary, and it stated that he was a member of the Modern Woodsmen at Oak Hill, and in 1900 moved his membership to Bim. After that, it stated that he also had become a member of the Zion Walls Baptist Church in 1910. So we're not sure if that was the church that was mentioned in that obituary. There is not much left of that site. There used to be some of the foundation, but when we went to take pictures, we could not find any more of that foundation.
There is a few stones there left. Most of them you cannot read, but one of the names that we can read on that is Student Broker. Bill Hobbleke then tore down that church for the lumber, and we're not sure where that lumber went to. After the church was gone, the Modern Woodsman, John mentioned that they met over the warehouse, but they would have picnics at this area, and someone reported that they always ended up into a fight. What we don't know is when that was built or what real denomination that was. But what we do know is the church has always been a constant in this community. The essence of a town is more than just dates and brick and mortar and wooden buildings. It's also the people who live there, their shared memories, traditions, and experiences. I want to talk a little bit about some of the BIM traditions. One tradition that has endured in BIM for over 60 years is the deer barbecue. This community has hunted deer together for that length of time, and at the end of the season, they would all pitch in, whoever had killed an animal, pitched in meat, and they would have a big deer barbecue. Stories of hunts were told and retold. Beer was consumed. One year it was so cold they said they had to build a fire under the keg so that the beer would stay liquid enough to come out the spigot. That tradition continues today with many generations hunting together and enjoying the deer barbecue. It's a family event. In the spring, the community event was the annual fish fry. The men would take the big hook to the creek, and when they came back, they had tubfuls of suckers who were on shoal. The table was laden with fried fish and all the good food that the women would bring in. Another time for a get-together was a shivaree. A newly married couple could expect the whole community to show up soon after their marriage to celebrate their union. Everyone would meet at a designated spot and then go in convoy to the home of the newlyweds. Horns honking, firecrackers popping, guns firing, pot lids, cowbells, anything that would make noise went along with the shivaree. It was always a lively event. The traditions of BIM, though, are not only just having fun together, it's also working together in time of need. In the mid-1950s, the BIM men banded together to put in a corn crop for George Hebner, who was laid up and unable to work that spring. While talking to people about this project, I heard some inspiring stories. And one that I'd like to share with you is about Bill Petrosky. When he was about 49 years old, he fell against a saw blade while helping to cut the winter's firewood and severed his arm near his shoulder. This was before helicopters, cell phones, and 911, remember. Mr. Petrosky was taken to St. Louis by car. How he kept from bleeding to death, I don't know, and was admitted into a hospital there. And his sister lived in St. Louis near the hospital, and as luck would have it, her blood type perfectly matched Mr. Petrosky's. So she went to the hospital, and laying side by side with her brother, she transfused her blood directly into him. Mr. Petrosky lived to the age of 94 and led a productive life, raising a family, farming, and doing blacksmithing, all with one arm. Unfortunately, Bill's sister died shortly after the accident, and they're not sure, but maybe because she gave too much of her own blood. Another story is about Harvey Petrosky. Now, Mr. Petrosky was a well-known electrician in this part of the community, and at one time he came in contact with a live, hot electrical wire and received a very heavy electrical shock. and his hair turned completely white. He had very dark hair, and it just turned completely white overnight. So can you imagine seeing him at church the next day, and there's a man with completely white hair? Many, many years ago, there was a family that lived in the town of Bim whose women were rumored to be witches. Now, two different people told me that their mother or grandmother had spoken to the lady of the house, and she offered to teach them the art of witchcraft. Some told me they thought that was just rumor because the family was a little bit different. You be the judge. I was told that a certain young man was dating the young lady of the house, and for some reason he decided to break off the relationship. When he told her about it, she said, "I'll put a curse on you and any of your other love interests." But I never heard that anything ever happened to him, or to any of his other girlfriends. Another source telling about this particular family said that while he was visiting his grandmother, the lady of the house came and wanted to buy a gander. Well, the grandmother had refused the lady several times, but at this particular time, she agreed to sell her a male goose. The deal and transaction was made, and the lady tucked the goose under her arm and walked out the gate. And this gentleman said that as they watched her walk away, they then turned around, and all the geese in the poultry yard behind them was laying dead. You be the judge. And then there was Charlotte Geese.
Jim, do you have something you want to add?
Yeah.
To be there.
This was a gentleman right here that was at his grandmother's house. I wasn't going to name names, sorry. And then there was Charlotte Geese. Everyone in the neighborhood called her Aunt Charlotte. And everyone knew her for miles around. And that's because that's where she walked, miles around. In her later years, after her husband died, she lived with her daughter and son-in-law. But for some reason, she just didn't get along very well with her daughter's husband. And so when the atmosphere became too tense, Aunt Charlotte would grab her wide-brimmed hat and her walking stick and would take out walking. Now, her daughter lived on Hog Trough Road. And she would just walk to one of the neighbors or a distant relative and just stay with them. If there was garden produce to put up or a new baby to tend or housework to do, she just pitched right in. And when she felt the time was time to leave, she would pick up her hat and her walking stick and walk on to another house. In her old age, Aunt Charlotte was nearly doubled over at a right angle, with her head facing the ground. But that didn't keep her from wandering and walking. Many young men from the Bim area served their country in peacetime and in war. But I can only find one example of a young man that made the ultimate sacrifice. George Yankee, son of William, Big Bill, and Annie Yankee, was killed in World War II in March of 1945 before the war ended in August of that year. Mr. Yankee was 23 years old and served under General Patton. Like many small towns, Bim had a baseball team. This picture shows the 1934 Bim Tigers. They played teams as far away as Oak Hill and Swiss. Some of the team members were Ambrose Zeman, Earl Crammy, Milford Crammy, Victor Thiem, Bill Holmeyer, Frank Fuchs Jr., Louis Judeman, Taft Matthews, Charlie Hobbicky, William Hosfeld, and Chris Judeman. They played their home games in the field across from the store, which is next to Bob Blackwell's house, right on Highway 19. As early as 1945, Bim had an area 4-H club. At that time, the club met at the Persimmon Pond School. Later, they met at the Tahoe School and in the members' homes. This picture shows some of the 4-H members getting ready to plant pine trees and multiflora roses as a community project. Yes, I said multiflora roses. The pine trees lining the road to the church as you came in on the gravel road were planted by these kids. The BIM 4-H Club continues today, and they meet here at the St. John's UCC Church. The event that brought BIM to the attention of the whole country was the robbery, murder, and lynching that occurred in 1883. In May of that year, two men came to the home of Mr. William Collier. While Mrs. Collier was fixing them a meal, she overheard them talking about robbing the BIM store. When Mr. Collier came home, she told him of the conversation, and he went to see Mr. Burchard. They devised a plan to foil the robbery. Mr. Collier and Mr. Burchard's son, William, would go to the store after dark and wait for the burglars. Both men would be armed, one with a shotgun, one with a rifle. When the two arrived at the store, however, they discovered that the robbers had already beat them and were already inside the store. The robbers saw them coming, and a gunfight ensued. William Burchard, the son, was fatally shot. Mr. Collier was also wounded, but he managed to kill one of the robbers. The other robber escaped. When the news of young William's death spread through the neighborhood, everyone was up in arms, and they were met together to try to find the escaped robber. However, they had lost the trail because of night. Several days later, a young man was discovered at Dr. Johnson's residence near the Burbus post office that is now Rosebud. He was being treated for a gunshot wound. Presuming him to be the BIM store robber, he was arrested and taken to Owensville, where he was put under guard in the upper story of the Bushman store. That evening, a group of citizens stormed the building with the idea of taking the prisoner and the law into their own hands. However, the prisoner escaped, and the plan failed. Sometime during the night, a horse was stolen from Mr. Jesse Melton. A posse of neighbors at once took up the trail and found the fugitive lying in the woods fast asleep. Realizing he was surrounded and unarmed, the man gave up without struggle. He said his name was Whitney, but some say that his real name was Brown. He said his dead partner's name was Collier, who was actually a second cousin to the William Collier where the whole episode began. Whitney was again arrested, and this time taken to Herman to the courthouse, where he was incarcerated to wait arrival of the prosecuting attorney from Union. But a trial was not to be. A mob assembled for a second time, and this time their plan was carried out. Mr. Whitney was taken from the Herman courthouse and hung by the neck in a tree at the edge of town. This is the only vigilante lynching ever recorded in Gastonade County history. The identity of the mob members was never discovered. The robber killed during the robbery was buried near the scene of the crime along the Dry Fork Creek. An account in the Herman paper says the body was later exhumed by some Washington County officials who were chasing the pair for horse thieving. However, Mr. Collier, in an interview at the age of 95, said the bones of the robber was washed out by the creek and later buried farther inland. A pistol that was used in the BIM store robbery is on display at the Gastonade County Museum. So if any of you want to visit there and see that, it's there to be seen. Another exciting event happened in 1960. A small crop duster plane landed on Highway 19 in front of the BIM store. The pilot said he was out of fuel and asked Mr. Crater if he had any ethyl. Well, he did. So Armin filled up the tank on the plane and then walked out on the highway to stop traffic, and with a wave of his hand, the plane took off and was gone. I'm going to end my part of the program with a legend that many believe happened right here in the BIM area. Like all legends, there's always some truth to the story. When our country was young, before the Louisiana Purchase, Spanish explorers traveled in this part of the New World. It is said that they discovered a silver mine. And they mined some of the silver and made it into silver bars and stacked it in a cave, intending to come back for it, but they never returned. Fast forward to 1838. An unknown man purchased a gun in St. Louis. That evening, when he was examining his new purchase, he found a map rolled up in the barrel of the gun, showing the location of a silver mine. He took the gun back to the store where he had bought it and asked the man, "Where did you get this gun?" And the storekeeper said he had bought it from an Indian who had found it next to the body of a white man laying in the woods. The unknown man told the storekeeper that he was going to take the map and find that silver. But first he made a copy of the map and left it with the storekeeper. He was going west, where the map said to find the silver mine. The unknown man never returned. The storekeeper held on to the map, but never attempted to hunt for the silver. Some years later, a Frenchman named Pierre Duval came to St. Louis and heard the story about the Spanish silver mine and the unknown map. Now that agrees with a story that an old Indian told me, Duval said. I don't know exactly where it is, but the Indian said it was in the Ozark Mountains near the Smoky River. And many think that is the dry fork because when it rains, the dry fork looks like it's smoking. By piecing together information from the storekeeper and from the storekeeper's map and from his memory of what the Indian had said, Duval and a companion followed the map about 100 miles west of St. Louis to the Bim area. Eventually, they found a cave, and in it were numerous bars of silver. Duval and his friends could only carry about 5 bars each, but they made a very careful study of the landscape so they could come back when they had wagons and ways to haul the rest of it out. Some of the notations was a bare hilltop, a grove of ancient oaks, a mighty hickory tree, a huge beaver pond, and a sawtooth horizon line. All landmarks that can be found around the Bim area. The companion made it back to St. Louis, but Duval was killed by Indians on the return trip. The companion had his 5 bars of silver and his map showing the location of the treasure. Unfortunately, he was found murdered a short time later and the map stolen. His murderer was caught and the map recovered by the sheriff, who kept it for many years and then sold it to unknown persons. Do any copies of the map survive today? Are the silver bars still waiting to be discovered? We don't know. This legend has been told and retold by different families in the Bim area for many generations. The Taylor family lore is that William Taylor settled on his property in Bim because he had seen a copy of the map and discerned that that's where that silver mine was. Some say a copy of the map was walled up in the foundation of a house that was built in the Bim area. Several years ago, the Post-Dispatch ran an article about the silver mine legend. It followed the traditional story that's been recorded here in Bim. But as far as I know, the Post-Dispatch reporter never interviewed anybody here in Bim. So where did he get his information? From someone that had seen another map? I don't know. Whether truth or fiction, the silver mine remains a legend that has survived for decades and has become a part of the Bim history. Johannes and Elizabeth Hausfeld came to America from Germany in the 1800s. They had 9 children. From the lineage of these 9 children came many of the family names in Bim today. Miller, Crammy, Taylor, Bruins, Petrosky, Corman, Landwehr, Anke. Bim has always been a close-knit community, maybe because of that family connection, maybe because of fate. The people here play together, work together, mourn together, rejoice together. I consider it a blessing to have been raised in this community and been influenced by its values and have experienced all that it has to offer. I thank you all for coming today. And that concludes our program. And I would ask if anyone has any facts that they would like to share with us that we can add it to our research, or anybody have a particular story they'd like to share about their experiences in BIM, or a family story or tradition, history? Yes, Miss Atkinson.
Just because the creators were always so good to us when we moved here 30 years ago, and it's hard for me to even think that we were just barely 30 when we moved here. But Jim Crater, one time, because I'd not farmed before, and we had just moved here and had a loft full of probably a little too green hay, and I went out to check it, and Jerry was traveling, so I called. The only person I knew that would know what to do was Jim, and it was like 10 o'clock at night. He came to the farm, went upstairs, moved around some hay, and said, "Your barn's not going to burn down, but don't do that again."
Is there anything else anyone would like to share?
We met his grandfather, Reverend Adolph Picker, that he taught school in the log school. And that probably would have been back in the 1860s or 70s.
In the log BIM school?
But I've never found anything on it.
I could add one to it. I have here the deed of my grandfather by acreage at BIM in 1877, where he built a blacksmith shop. And he was wife married at Higginsville and lived here. And the first 5 children were baptized in this church. But was it this church or was it the other church? But Carol found the baptisms in the records of this church. And they are dated back to that time.
And that would have been at Ahrens, right?
Yes.
Yes. So there was a Mr. Ahrens that owned a blacksmith shop in BIM too. Now whether it was the same one or whether he had a different one, I don't know that we would know that. But Arden,
I thought at one time I heard that there were 2 blacksmith shops in BIM.
in BIM,
I just
that could have been. Could have been. Well, I want to thank you all again for coming. Remind you to view our display here, have some cookies, go down to the BIM store if you'd like. I'd also like to just put in a plug here. If anyone is interested in becoming a member of the Gaston County Historical Society, please see Anna at the back of the room and she'll get you signed up right away.
Phyllis.
Yes. Yes.
You didn't say anything about the wedding dress up there.
Okay. Tell me, John, this is John's grandmother's, which would be Henry.
Henry Frank and Mary Sophia Stock. She was a Stock. And they were the owners of the BIM store down in Old BIM.
Okay. The wedding dress is from Mary Stock, who married Henry F. Prater, and that's a picture of their wedding there. And Mary told me that dress is so tiny she could not get it on even when she was a little kid. So she was a very small woman.
I forgot about this.
Oh. And over here, leaning up against the post, is the actual post office letterbox that was in the old BIM store, which I think is really, really cool. Anna?
I might have missed this, but did you know of any Methodist church in Down?
Well, the church on the hill, we've heard that it was Baptist, Presbyterian, Methodist.
Lutheran.
We've heard of, yeah, all of it. So
Okay,
we don't really
I have
know.
a little thing about the Methodist church in Down that kind of Cleopatus was sort of.
And it could be, a lot of times the churches then maybe didn't even have a regular pastor and it was just whoever was coming through. So if there was a Methodist minister traveling through, maybe he held services there, and for that year it was a Methodist church, and if a Baptist minister came through the next year, we don't know for sure.
I think it was like along a creek and the circuit rider went from here to Champion City and along that way. That was what I was.
That church on the hill, the history is kind of fuzzy. It's hard to tell.
We also have reports that the gypsies camped there,
Yeah.
the Native Americans camped there at that site.
Where did the Showboat Dance Hall actually sit?
Okay, it was on Highway 19.
I remember seeing it, but I don't know where it was.
Okay. Where the Ben's stored, as you're going back to Owensville, it would have been, I guess, where Baxter's house, about where Baxter's house sits now. Is that right?
Where Chester's shed is.
Oh,
North of the store.
yes, just north of the store.
It's just north of the store, next to the Miller Road.
Okay, before you cross Miller Road, between Miller Road and the Ben store.
There's a shed, a building next to the brick house, there's a shed there. The shed is actually setting on the foundation of the showboat.
If you look here, just a
I've been on the
second.
foundation of the showboat for 7 years.
Yeah, Paula has the picture here, just a second.
Keep going up, 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 up. Keep going. Nope, we missed it.
It's right there somewhere.
One of
I
the-
don't have my glasses on, give me a break.
Right there, stop. Try 38.
Yeah.
Okay, on the picture.
Whoops.
No, that's not the showboat. That's not the showboat. Okay,
Let me pull this picture up.
Where's the picture?
That's separation.
That is the only outhouse in town.
yeah, we were pretty proud of that outhouse. We've shown it several times now.
It's still standing, isn't it?
Where?
That outhouse?
Oh, Paul. Right in the middle. Okay,
Okay, see,
right back there is the showboat,
Right here, you can see,
where she's got the arrow.
right here, you can see the showboat in the distance.
Building down, that is for a while, they have a dance hall there.
yeah. Oh, the store building, yes, was a tavern and a dance hall and mechanic shop for a while.
They were all armed.
Just a store. Yeah. Just a minute.
Pump gas when I worked with that for about 3 years.
You helped pump gas at the Crater store?
Pumping gas, working, changing tires,
And he
back on.
just said to you that he was a bartender at this show.
Oh, well, I was a bartender at the showboat. I think my mom worked in the restaurant part. I think. They moved it. Did I miss anything back? Thank you all for coming. Let's have some cookies.